This is the Haulin Assets podcast where we show you how to start and run your own trucking company. Ever wanted to go out on your own? Follow Chris as he goes through the highs and lows of running on his own authority.
Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the Haulin Assets episode. This is episode number 99, and I am your host, Craig Hanks. Over there, he is Chris. Chris, how's it going?
It's going pretty well. How you doing?
You know, I'm not too bad. I am interested, though, Chris, to see how this episode is going to go, because, you know, we normally are recording in the middle of the day, fighting the jets for, audio space, or we record in the morning if we have to, but today we're recording quite late at night. So we're both going to be, I think, a little punchy.
I might fall asleep in the middle of the episode. This is not my ideal time of the day.
So what you're saying is you're old. You're an old man.
I'm an old man. I'm definitely in an old man's body when it comes to... I haven't quite shifted to eating dinner at 4 o'clock yet, but I'm definitely...
But 4:15.
Yeah, no,
It's not far off. No. All right. So, Chris, today, episode 99, we're talking about overhead and how sexy it is.
Yes.
Right?
No. It ain't sexy.
Oh, it ain't sexy.
It ain't sexy. And kind of a funny story. Well, actually, before we get to that, I want to give a teaser because at the end of the episode, the impact tip today, we're going to talk a little bit about buying trucks and specifically why we've been able to get them when everybody's having a harder time. So this impact tip's going to be a little bit longer than most and a good one to listen to. So stay for the end.
All right.
Now back to the ain't. There's a kind of a funny story with that. I'm typing out the episode today and the notes and everything for it, and I type out the title on my computer and I type out ain't, and I get that little red squiggly line. The one that's the bane of my existence.
Sure.
One of my mother's biggest disappointments in me is the fact that I cannot spell for the life of me.
Yeah.
And so I'm typing that out, and I asked my wife, I'm like, how do you spell ain't? And you know what she said? She does this cute little poem and says, ain't a word. You ain't supposed to use it. If you say ain't five times and you ain't gonna live. And I'm like, what? And she's like, ain't's not a word. And so I started like playing around. I'm like, okay, I'm going to dive into this rabbit hole and start doing a little bit of research and see if ain't really isn't a word. I knew it wasn't like the most classy word in the world, but I thought it was still a word. And so I looked up on a bunch of different dictionaries and on the internet, the Google, Google knows everything. And are you falling asleep from the, am I talking too long? You look like you're falling asleep.
Ready.
Your eyes have glazed over.
Well, sure.
Okay. So anyway, it is a legit word. It's just kind of what they kind of deem a non-standard word.
Right.
So
let me tell you why it's a word.
Okay.
Chris. Are you ready?
I'm ready. Yeah.
So and I guess we're going on this little journey early before we get to trucking stuff, right? But grammatically, there is a spot for it. It is a legit word as far as I'm concerned because we have negative contractions. Okay, let's start with the positive ones. We have the verb to be. So he is, you are, I am, they are, right? Now make it negative. They aren't. He isn't. You aren't. I
am.
Amn't. Ain't.
I ain't.
I ain't.
There you go. Yeah,
there is a spot for it. It makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
So now I just wanted to give
I've never looked at it from that way. That's a good way to,
So I wanted to give this little piece of ammunition to anybody who cares about the word ain't, which is, all 6 of us out there. So next time somebody gives you grief for saying ain't, just, give them the grammatical heave-ho and tell them to get lost.
Yeah, there you go. It's good. You can use it. Use it all you want.
There you go. Yeah. All right. So, Chris, what ain't sexy? Overhead. Overhead ain't sexy.
No.
Now, we're going to talk about that, but of course, I need to remind everybody to go to HaulinAssetsLLC.com for full show notes. Find us on Facebook. Review us on, iTunes or whatever it's called, and all the other ones.
All of them.
Provided you like us. If you don't like us, then just leave us alone and go away. But if you do, give us a 5-star review. That would be very helpful and wonderful. But otherwise, HaulinAssetsLLC.com. And of course, go to motorcarrierhq.com if you are thinking of starting or expanding your trucking business. or need any help with an existing trucking business, right? So, Chris, shall we get started then?
Let's dive into it.
Overhead. So how do you want to start with this?
Let me kind of set the stage a little bit about why this. I've kind of been thinking about this. Like everybody else in the world, I've kind of been glued to the TV and the news outlets and reading as much as I can in the last month about the war in Ukraine. You know, especially with my experience in the military, it's just been absolutely fascinating and interesting to see how the Ukrainian people have stood up and defended their own country against what everybody before this war started kind of considered insurmountable odds. And they've just done an awesome job. And then on the other hand, Putin has just completely botched it.
Right.
And it's been fascinating to watch. And as I've done this, I've kind of started to think, well, you know, how can some of the lessons learned from this war translate into lessons I can learn in business? And, you know, there's quite a few. And one of the things that's kind of really stuck out to me is something that goes along the lines of, there's a quote that's pretty common in the military that says, tactics win battles, logistics wins wars.
Right.
And, you know, logistics is not the most sexy thing in the entire world. Like when people think of the military, you know, they're not thinking, and war, they're not thinking, oh, logistics, goody, let's go. We're going to win this war with logistics.
Did you know that supply chain is originally a military term?
Really? No, I did not know that.
Yeah, the term supply chain, I mean, it's literally the chain, you know, the chain to get supplies to the front.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's where that comes from.
That's cool.
So
the supply chain logistics, we're all heavily involved in it.
Yep.
You know, that's what we do in trucking. It's such a huge part of the logistics world. Well, in the military, it's so true that logistics is really what wins the military, especially in today's modern military, where you need so many supplies to, you know, kind of conduct warfare the way that we do. And you see, you know, Russia just falling flat on their face on the logistics realm. And that's a big reason why they're having such a hard time. And so, just like logistics is not the most sexy thing in the world, overhead and managing overhead is not the most sexy thing in the world. But in reality, if you do it well, you're going to set yourself apart from your competition. But if you're like Putin and you do it poorly, you're essentially going to, you know, kill yourself a slow, painful death.
Okay, so you're bringing in two terms here, logistics and overhead. These don't necessarily have a ton to do with each other, right?
No,
I'm just
kind of using it as a comparison,
an analogy or something.
An analogy. Yeah.
Okay, so overhead. So all right, logistics is your supply chain stuff. Overhead. Define overhead for me, Chris.
So overhead is really kind of a business expense that you can't really charge directly to a particular service or work or product. So, if you take, for example, if you're manufacturing widgets, you know, the pieces that make up the widgets are not overhead. They're tied directly to that widget. Whereas the rent that you pay in the warehouse where you house the widgets,
right,
is not directly part of building necessarily those widgets.
It's not part of the end product.
Right. And it's not directly tied to that end product. So in trucking, some of the most common expenses, overhead expenses. Well, actually, let's talk about Haulin assets, overhead.
Okay. Which, by the way, people can go, again, HaulinAssetsLLC.com, check out one of the financials episodes and look at the P&L report. You know, it's all there. Everything we're about to talk about. It'll
show what our overhead expenses are. So our biggest overhead expense is owner salaries.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, you know, that's pretty common, especially for a small trucking company. That's going to make up a big chunk of it.
And if you're an owner operator, that's your salary.
That's your salary. And Nate and I, you know, we've got to be able to feed our families. We've got to be able to eat. And so we take a salary. Owner salary from the business. The other, that's the biggest one. The next biggest one, which is a pretty big step down, is parking spaces. So we've gotten to the point where we're at 5 trucks now. we have one permanent parking space, adding a second permanent parking space so that with our 5 trucks, we'll have 2. And the reason we only need 2 is because most of our trucks are either out on the road, they're typically not home at the same time, and a few of our drivers have places to park the trucks near where they live, and we don't.
You can
have
park
to pay
them here,
those.
Chris. That's fine.
Right outside your street.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm not sure a 75-foot tractor trailer would fit without blocking driveways on your street.
Hey, look.
But we'll try it. We'll block your driveway first and not anybody else's.
If all of my delightfully redneck neighbors can have campers sitting out front, I can have a 75-foot tractor trailer. Okay.
Okay. Well, I'll remember that. You can't get mad at me when I tick off your neighbors for bringing a semi truck on your street.
Okay. So parking space rent. Anything else that's kind of common?
We've got some other small miscellaneous in our overhead, but that's kind of it.
So what about something, Chris, for a trucking company, something like insurance? You talk about insurance a lot, or maybe something like truck payments, your loan payments. Would those qualify as overhead?
I wouldn't count the truck payments as overhead because that's part
the truck
of
is your
the service.
product.
That is essentially our product. The truck, the drivers, the fuel, those are all things that are tied directly to. We don't have necessarily a product. Ours is more of a service, right? We're hauling stuff for people. We're providing a service.
Would you say that you haul assets?
Something like that.
Okay.
I think I've heard that before.
So I keep throwing you off. I'm not, like I said, we're a little punchy tonight.
We're a little punchy tonight.
Yeah.
So the point is that those expenses are more tied directly to the service.
Sure.
So
Okay.
not really overhead.
So does that change this idea of overhead? I kind of brought up an owner-operator. They're paying themselves a salary, just like you and Nate are for a 5-truck fleet now. But as a general rule, does overhead change for a larger company once you start adding on trucks? Is it just going to be more of the same, or are there other expenses or other overhead expenses that you can expect?
There will be the bigger you get, the more overhead expenses you're going to have. And so let's talk a little bit about that. This is one of the things that I think can really make for a competitive advantage for a small trucking company versus a big trucking company. If you look at the big trucking companies, they're going to get some economical competitive advantages because they can purchase things in bulk. So you look at fuel, they're going to probably get better fuel pricing because they buy so much fuel, tires, maintenance cost. A lot of those things are just plain going to get better pricing because of the volume that they do those things in. But where owner operators and small trucking companies can really make that up is by shaving their overhead costs, because a small trucking company is not going to have some of the same big overhead costs that a larger one does. So you look at Haulin assets, for example, we don't have a building. We don't have office space. We just either work out of our homes or, do something else, and we don't have to have that. And so that's one big, huge expense that we don't have that saves us money.
But if you got big enough, you probably would have to.
At some point, you'll have to, because you'll have employees. They'll need to typically have a place to work. You may at some point get a shop. You'll need a shop, and that takes a physical space. But when you don't have office rent, you don't have utility expenses. Those are things that can be a big savings and set you apart. Other things that bigger trucking companies will typically have. A lot of times they'll have a vehicle that they use to run things around, and so there's a vehicle, like not a truck vehicle, but your pickup truck type expense that you're throwing your chains in to move them around, or
the around town stuff.
Yeah. And so that's a big expense, and sales and marketing becomes a big expense. And another thing, your salaries become a bigger expense, because as you grow, you're going to have somebody that does a safety manager. You're going to have somebody that manages your permits. You're going to have somebody that manages your drivers and does your dispatching. And, it just goes on and on and on and on. And those are all big overhead expenses. They're not tied directly to the service.
Right. So a driver is tied directly to the service, but all of the, when you've got 30 trucks, then you've got a permanent dispatcher just for your company who's going to be, not driving. So they would be counted as overhead, right? Their salary.
Correct.
Okay. Yep. Or, or whatever other employee you've got.
And so, one of the ways that smaller trucking companies save money is by limiting that overhead. Even as you get an employee, you'll typically have your employees wearing several different hats. You'll have one employee that manages safety, and they may also do sales. Like the owner may manage the safety program and do the sales for the company. You may have an office person that handles all the billing and then also manages the maintenance and repair costs and coordinating the maintenance and repairs on trucks.
Right.
So, when you've got people doing that, they typically work more efficiently, and it gives a trucking company the ability to operate very lean with low overhead, save on that expense. And then that kind of helps offset that competitive advantage that some of the bigger trucking companies have because of their bulk purchasing ability.
Okay. All right. So how does this come into play then if you're advising companies, whether big or small? Does your advice change? What do you want to get out there as far as overhead? What advice do you want to give?
There's one thing that I really want to stick on, because I think most owners, there's one thing that kind of is where owners have a higher likelihood of failing.
Okay.
Because they don't manage this one overhead expense.
Chris, whatever you're about to say, it sounds clickbaity. Okay, just manage this one weird expense, right?
It is a little clickbaity, but you know what? The reality is I've seen this happen so many times, and we've talked a little bit about it on the podcast before, but it's the one thing that just, because of the temptation level and a myriad of other things, it's just the one area that guys have a tendency to just let things get out of control. They usually don't get tempted to go buy office space before they need to. They usually manage those miscellaneous expenses, and those costs don't creep up high enough to the point that it has the ability to just take you out of business because your costs just get out of control.
Okay.
And this one's it's gonna kind of maybe not make a ton of sense, but it's owner salary.
Okay, so owner salary. Let me see if I can figure out why, Chris. Okay, let me puzzle through this.
I want to hear.
Because you've talked before about the discipline that you want owner-operators to have, and that you tried to operate under when you were flying solo and driving your own single truck. And that's that there's a temptation to pull money out of the business that should be going back into the business.
Yep.
The example you always used to bring up, 30, 40 episodes ago was the pickup truck. Hey, I'm starting to see some success. I'm going to go get that Ford F-350 I've had my eye on for the last decade. I'm finally going to go get it. But your company isn't established enough. You haven't saved enough. You haven't done the financial due diligence to put stuff away for a rainy day, or to save up for that second truck and the driver that you may want to hire, whatever the case may be. People get ahead of themselves out over their skis and start spending money that isn't ready to be pulled out of the business yet. Am I on the right track?
That's exactly what it is. You're not seeing guys just saying every 3 months, hey, I'm going to give myself a raise, or hey, I'm going to give myself another raise. And that's not how that salary creeps up. What happens is exactly what you've talked about. They go out and they buy, a pickup that's all of a sudden they've got $1,000 payment for that $90,000 pickup. They just purchased probably more like a $1,500 a month payment. Oh. And then they go, it's crazy. And then they go out and they buy they go buy a razor, and they go buy a snowmobile, and they, go buy all these toys and maybe a bigger house. And all of a sudden they're like, oh, I've got to start taking more money out of the business to be able to make all these payments that I've all of a sudden incurred on the personal side of things. And so that creates the need to take out an excessive amount of salary. And I've seen that get to the point where, when time, usually what ends up happening is when times are really good, like they are right now, and rates are really good and money's coming in, you can keep making those payments and those higher salaries. But the problem happens when there's a downturn in the economy, and then all of a sudden you're still, you're strapped into these big payments that you've made on the personal side, and your company's not making as much money because, things have changed a little bit. The market's corrected some. And now all of a sudden you're still having to make those payments, but you don't have the money, the revenue level that's needed to be able to sustain those payments coming out.
Right. So, I mean, it's the tale as old as time. You're buying things, you're doing things with money that you can't actually afford. So yeah, in some ways, it's almost like in good times, the profits are a mirage. Yes, the money is coming in, and that is good, but it tricks you into thinking that it is in fact profit or permanent profit, when in fact what it is it's a down payment on your future. Keep putting it back into the business, and find more success. Use what's the old cliche? It takes money to make money. Yep. Use your money to make more money. Yeah. And then you'll be able to afford that pickup.
Yep. And I've seen this happen even outside, not trucking companies themselves. So I worked for Flying J right out of college for 5 years. If you probably don't remember, but some people that listen probably remember that Flying J declared bankruptcy back in it was either 2008, 2009, around there, while I was working there. And the reason they ended up having to declare bankruptcy was because they were over leveraged. The same kind of thing. They had purchased some assets that just had these egregious payments, and they're having to put money into it, and they just couldn't keep up with it as soon as the market started to turn a little bit. If you remember right, in 2008, 2009, that's when the market started to turn. They had to declare bankruptcy pretty quickly.
So it's not just the owner-operator who wants the F-350. It can be a giant corporation that gets out over its skis.
Yep.
Okay.
I want to tell, I've kind of skipped over one other example I wanted to tell of managing your overhead expenses. And this just happened to me really recently. We're in the process of building a house right now. Just broke ground not too long ago. And we were showing the house to some friends, and it's in a new neighborhood. And we're like the first house in this section of the neighborhood to start breaking ground. And the week that we were showing our friends, they had pulled all the forms off the foundation. They just poured the foundation, and the company that did our forms had their trucks parked in a cul-de-sac where they hadn't started construction yet. And they're just sitting there. My friends are like, well, why in the heck are their form trucks still here? Why haven't they gone somewhere else? Well, it's because they hadn't gone to another job yet. And I guarantee this company doesn't have a big yard where they park everything. And so they just kind of move it from the area of a job site from place to place to save on overhead. It's really, it's a smart way to operate your business.
Nobody else is using this cul-de-sac.
Yeah. I'm just going to park my trucks here, and as soon as we have another job come, we'll go move them and take them to the other job, and it saves a lot of money.
Yeah. Interesting. I saw on the notes where you did write that down. You're like, talk about the Forms trucks. And I was like, I think that's a typo, Chris. I don't know what Forms trucks is, but now I
that's
do.
What it
now
is.
I know what you're talking about. Yeah. All right. So anything else on this one that you wanted to hit as far as overhead goes?
That's it.
Okay. So yeah, I think it's a term that will be very valuable for people to know. Obviously anybody who's been in business for themselves or in certain capacities probably has heard the term, might understand it, but it's one of those ones you want to master. You need to understand what overhead is, what fits into that, under that umbrella, so that you can best control it, right? So yeah, it's a really important one. I bet it's one that we could come back to maybe in more detail at some point.
For sure.
But yeah, for now, keep a lid on it.
Yep. It ain't sexy, but it's oftentimes one of the differences between being a winner and a loser in business is managing that overhead.
All right. Well, Chris, you mentioned an impact tip that you wanted to spend a little time on today. What is that?
Yep. The impact tip itself is get out and network.
and 70% of our audience just broke out in hives at the word network. It's like me and spreadsheets.
Yep. Right? It's we got to be out and be social and talk to people, get to know people. And the reason I'm going to kind of step back and explain why this has been, one of the reasons it's significant, and one of the things that I think has made a big impact on our business and our ability to grow. So one of the more common questions that I get from listeners and people that are interested in the podcast is, especially right now in the way the truck market is how are you getting new trucks? They hear us adding a new truck every quarter or so. And just wondering, like, I've tried to go buy a new truck. I can't get a new truck. Nobody will talk to me. Well, there's a reason that we've been able to get new trucks. We just got a new one. We have a month and a half ago, almost 2 months ago. We've got another one coming up in about another month. And the reason that we're getting those trucks is because of two reasons. One is we've developed a good relationship with a salesperson.
Okay.
And then that salesperson back in the spring of 2021, we're in the spring of 2022 right now. So this is a year ago. He came to Nate and I and he said, if you want to be able to get trucks for 2022, you're going to have to order them within about the next 2 months. So I need you to figure out how many trucks you want for 2022.
And that's where that yearly planning comes in that we talked about, right?
The yearly planning is important, but we probably wouldn't have started thinking about that until the fall, like 6 months later. But because we knew him, he knew us, we've kind of been talking to him about what we wanted to do. He gave us that heads up that he needed to know in July, essentially, like the beginning of July of 2021, how many trucks we wanted for 2022 and essentially place that order right then.
So, all right. So you had a salesperson that you could reach out to and you had a relationship at that point where he actually reached out to you and said, here's what you're going to need to do because he knew your goals. He knew what you wanted to build, right? But we've skipped a whole bunch of steps here. Okay. So you met somebody who worked in truck sales and now he's reaching out to you saying, hey, if you want to build up, here's what you need to do. But there's a lot in between, right? How did you build that relationship? What does that actually look like?
We keep reaching out to them, and whether that's to kind of go look at trucks or to kind of let them know what we were trying to do. We'd maintain constant contact with them. We'd go visit them once every other month or so. We would, kind of text them or call them every now and again, asking questions, just so that we were kind of on the forefront of his mind. Because you can't, just like any relationships in business take time to develop, and you can't, meet a person on day one, never talk to them again, and expect them to give you the time of day at any other time in the future. He's got to, that other person has to feel comfortable with you just as much as you have to feel comfortable with them. And that just doesn't happen overnight. So it's cultivating that relationship. Incredibly important.
Okay. So, all right. So, and it's not like, you're not becoming, what was Anne of Green Gables? Bosom friends, right? It's not like you're inviting him into your wedding party or something. It's just maintaining contact, finding ways to stay in contact with that person as it, regarding your goals and how they can help you out and how you can help them out.
Take them out to lunch, once every several months, and just to maintain that relationship. Mm-hmm. Pick their brain, ask them questions, even if you already know the answer to the questions or you have your idea, like, why do I want to get this gear ratio of truck, or, what makes this one more advantageous to the other one? Just say, hey, I want to take you out to lunch. I want to pick your brain. That helps develop that relationship.
Yeah, because you never know what they might say. Maybe they'll have a surprising answer. You think you know the answer, and maybe they have something else for you. Chris, this sounds a lot like what you talked about with mentorships. Right? Yeah. Or it's different. This is not a mentorship.
It's different, but there's a lot of similarities for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Staying in contact and keeping those networks alive. Okay. What else do you want to talk about with this?
So that was the first thing. The second thing is, because of that conversation with him, we started that planning process of, okay, let's look at how many trucks we want to get in 22. And we started that planning and thought process really early. So that was the second thing. And we decided, by the July date that he gave us, how many trucks we wanted and placed our order. And that happened. So one other thing I want to talk about is, okay, so we started thinking about how many trucks we wanted. How do you make that determination?
Oof.
And it's hard. I think this is going
to... let me take a stab. Lots of spreadsheets, right, Chris?
There's some spreadsheets and a lot of thought goes into it. A lot of things you need to think about. And this probably warrants its own episode. So I'm just going to mention the things that I think you need to think about. So whenever you're trying to decide how many trucks you want to buy throughout the course of a year, you need to think about how much money you're going to have to come up with for down payments. You have to think about how much financing you're going to be able to qualify. So it's worth it to start talking to banks and, getting their opinion. You're going to have to do a new insurance down payment for every truck that you add. Another one that I think a lot of people don't think about all the time is you've got to maintain a certain level of a certain pace at hiring. And so not only do you have to hire a new driver for the new truck you're getting, but you also have to be able to keep pace with the attrition for the drivers that you lose. You're always going to have driver turnover. So you've got to be able to, keep the drivers you've got, replace them if you have guys quit, and hire the new drivers for the new trucks.
Right. Speaking of networking, right?
Yeah, networking is a great way to find drivers too.
Yeah,
for sure. A couple other things you need to think about is trailers. We had to essentially place orders for the trailers at the same time so that we knew we'd had a good, reasonable chance of getting trailers at the same time that we were getting trucks. And really, we've kind of decided that we want trailers a little bit before you get the trucks, because the trailers make a huge difference. You don't want to be doing power only if you don't have to. You can typically make more money with trailers, and that's really not part of our business model, the power only thing. So we want to make sure we had a trailer when the truck came on board.
Yeah.
Another couple little things that you need to keep in mind is any additional equipment that you need, or like add-ons. So like, are you going to get an APU? Do you need to order that APU? How far in advance do you need to order it? Your ELDs, your pre-pass, are you getting chain hangers put on, or inverters? Those are all little expenses, and they're all things that you need to think about in advance so that those things are ready at the same time that you end up getting your trucks.
So sounds easy, Chris.
Yeah, it's a piece of cake.
Super simple.
Yeah. So plan way in advance.
Yeah.
And the reason, so just to summarize, the two reasons that I feel like have been a big impact of why we've been able to get trucks is because we network, we have a good salesperson, and two, we started planning and making that decision, really over a year. For some of those trucks, we essentially ordered them a year in advance. For other ones, we ordered like 18 months in advance.
Wow.
And so, that's why we're getting them.
Yeah. And, I want to, I'm not tooting my own horn, and it sounds awful to say I'm tooting your horn, Chris, but but I will say this, as an employee, it's been a while since you've been an employee, Chris. Okay?
Has been
not so long for me. And I will say, employees have great fun, complaining about the bosses. What do they even do? They're not even down here working in the trenches with the rest of us. Mumble. But this is, hearing you describe that, boy, there's a lot of value there. And it's something that I couldn't pull off, at least not without, a lot of practice. These things take practice. It's complicated. All this planning, understanding what goes into growing the business, and, in your case, buying more trucks and getting more drivers in the pipeline, and, dealing with the salespeople and all this stuff. It's very complicated. So it takes practice. And that's why people, even if you're a one truck guy right now, you're an owner operator, if you're even thinking about this sometime in the future, now is the time to start getting these concepts under your belt, understanding these things. Even if you're not doing it now, start your education now. Yeah. And your education can and should go beyond just this podcast. There's a lot of other resources out there for you to start understanding these concepts. But I think it's monumentally important, because it looks like magic from the outside, right? All this planning, all this understanding of this stuff looks like magic. So good on you for all that planning, Chris.
Thanks. It's one of those things you've got to start thinking into the future. You've got to be able to see where you want to be further on down the road. And that's not something that you just kind of learn overnight. Right. It takes some practice. It takes some forethought. And it's one of the things that a good owner, a good CEO of a company, to really be successful at that role, you have to be the one that has that vision and plans for the future. Yeah.
All right, Chris, how you feeling? Do you feel like you gave this subject the attention it deserved?
I hope so.
Okay, good.
I think it's an important one.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for listening. Again, go give the positive reviews. We really appreciate them. Go to HaulinAssetsLLC.com. For the full show notes, any links, including past episodes with all the P&L that we put on the financials episodes. So go check those out. And then finally, go to motorcarrierhq.com. If you are thinking about starting your own company, you want to expand, or you want resources to just be able to do your job better as an owner, whatever the size of your business, then please go to motorcarrierhq.com. Chris, have a good one.
You too.
It's time to go put the old man to bed. It's way too late
It's way
for you.
past my bedtime.
Oh, it's way past,
I'm surprised I didn't nod off.
All right. Well, I'll see you in a couple weeks then.
See you then.